Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent Kyle Seraphin.
Oh, I'm sitting here talking and I don't have my scenes queued up. Welcome to the program. Hello, my friends. I'm sorry that did not record. That's really strange. I've got all these different scenes and I'm working off a laptop, which is not the normal computer that I'm working on. So, all right, now we're on the same page here. I drove in from Texas. I made it in to Arizona yesterday after a 16-hour drive. We set this thing up. The time zones are all different. And so welcome to the program. Today is Monday. It is March the 23rd, and it wouldn't be the Seraphin show on the road if we didn't have a little bit of a glitch. Here's the deal. Drove across country, 2-year-old that didn't exist the last time I was in this room. We had a 5-year-old, my son, my 2 daughters, 7 and 8. And I'm sitting here about 3 feet away from where I did the first recording that I ever did. The first time that I ever sat down and sat in front of a mic to try to share some information about what I was doing and why I was speaking out. And for my troubles, I got the first sort of hit piece ever written against me or written about me, written by Rylan Riley, who now is a kind of a friendly guy at NBC News. There's a grandfather clock off to my left right here that you can't see on the screen. And that's where this all started. So it's interesting to find myself back where it all began. Of course, I didn't have this laptop. I didn't have this microphone. I didn't have any of the knowledge that I have now about how it all works. And interestingly enough, I actually walked down this sort of memory road with folks from DOJ on Friday. So for those of you who are aware, I had to record the Friday show in advance with Steve Friend, and I got in the car first thing in the morning and I drove up to Dallas. And although the meeting and the information that was discussed in the meeting was confidential, the things that I said are not confidential. And what I did is I shared with the folks from DOJ that are involved in our lawsuit that we are straight up dealing with the same animal that we were dealing with before. And while the Trump administration may be in charge and the people that I was dealing with from DOJ, I think they're honest and I think they're probably operating in an honorable sense, there is nothing that you can do temporarily putting certain people in charge that might do the right thing today to stop government from reaching over its boundaries. And if you want to look any further into this, all you have to do is look at the Bill of Rights. You can look at the debates that took place between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. There was an instinct that by creating a centralized federal government, by giving broad authorities to something that didn't previously exist, you had to be able to keep it in check. And the only way that you could keep it in check was to constantly prune back this ever-growing ivy, this like ground cover that wants to take up as much space as possible. And we really fell down on the job for the last 100 years or so as an American people. I got a bunch of stories today about maybe some of the best of what America can be. We lost Chuck Norris over the weekend. We lost Chuck Norris on Friday. I guess I found out while I was sitting in the DOJ meeting. That may be amusing to some people. For those that are in my age bracket, if you're in your 40s, you grew up watching Chuck Norris sort of be like the ultra American, but on camera. And in real life, everything I know about that man was that he was kind, he was loving, he was fit up until the end. And he represented sort of like this heroic ideal that guys like me grew up with. It's like if something bad happens, one man with the right principles, with honor and with integrity will step forward and try to right the wrongs. And so Chuck Norris passed, and I think we'll cover that today. I also want to get into the fact that we are dealing with a 20-plus-year-old technique for psyop or propaganda, and it's not being sold in a way that anybody's willing to buy right now. And of course, we have a ceasefire that just popped up as of 5 p.m. last night from Donald Trump. So I'm going to read that, and we're going to get into all those things. I got a smattering of news stories coming from across the different spectrums. I wasn't able to get down any videos. I did get tagged in a bunch of them from Dan Bongino. We're going to talk about that a little bit as well. So Roadshow, we're going to get started with a sponsor read, and I want to say thanks to the folks over at My Patriot Supply who are sponsoring today's program. That is not the right button. I don't know what's going on. There we go. PrepareLikeKyle.com is the website. If you guys are out on the road and you look around and you see like, things could get sketchy, especially when you drive through the wasteland that is West Texas and a bunch of New Mexico, which is what I saw. It wouldn't take a lot for a major disruption to happen where you wouldn't be able to get to a store, like a couple of roads, and you have no ability to do that. If you don't have more than a month of emergency food to be able to feed you and your family, you should check out the folks over at My Patriot Supply. Right now, you can get their 4-week emergency food supply plus an additional free week of food at PrepareLikeKyle.com. They've got the best option for stable storage. It lasts for up to a couple of decades. As long as you're keeping it in a reasonable place, you're going to get 2,000 calories a day, real meals with real ingredients, no artificial flavors or colors, shelf life that is measured in many, 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 many years. So you don't have to have an emergency right now. You should go to the most trusted folks in the business. This is the folks that my wife and I are stocking underneath our stairwell. This is the stuff that we keep in our own house. And if you guys are not prepared, you have no idea what's going to come. I think if we were going to guess, I think none of us would have guessed that we would be bombing Iran in March of 2026 when we went out there and elected Donald Trump in November of 24. Things can change in a heartbeat. Make sure you are prepared. PrepareLikeKyle.com. There should be a link in the show description. Check them out. All right, now we can do the opening of this program. Let's get started. Okay, folks, check this out. There's Chuck Norris right there. You know I'm not at home because I have a mug that has a K on it, which comes from my mother's kitchen. And there's Chuck Norris, who I probably sat and watched sitting on the floor all of those movies. In fact, I also remember marching around in the military when I served in the Air Force. We came up with some Chuck Norris jodies or running cadences. And I learned the first one I ever heard at Airborne, and then I started adapting it, and I would make up verses on the fly. Something about Chuck Norris as the ultimate American, and you can see here if you're watching on the video, the iconic like cut-off sleeve denim shirt with denim pants, everything sort of tight and fitting in the way that only an 80s action star, wielding dual Uzis for no particular reason and shooting in a way that nobody would ever shoot. It's still represented. I can always hear it in my head. The running cadence would go, it would say, Delta Force, missing in action 2. They would say them in this order. He did all the great sort of American things that we thought. Like, if you were going to outsource the American victory, you'd outsource it to Chuck Norris, would you not? I think a lot of people thought we were doing something like that in the political version. The guy who was just going to go in and kick ass, and he's just going to take names, and he's not going to say any apologies to anybody. That's why I think there's so much disappointment right now. I'm watching people on the political right fracture. I'm watching people that pretend like they're on the right. That's actually a big problem in the so-called movement. It's interesting that over the weekend, Dan Bongino got accosted by Ivan Raiklin, who is a kind of a professional troll. He's also a retired Green Beret, so we can give him credit where it's due. He got accosted apparently by a retired or a former police officer calling him a pedo protector. And I think that people in the Trump administration are facing scrutiny from folks who would otherwise be ideologically aligned with them and would be looking for them to be successful. The people who would walk up and normally shake their hand, give them a hug, thanks so much for what you're doing. We're looking and going, I mean, we really wanted you to do this thing. What are you doing? And why aren't you doing it the way that we thought? And when people who have been praised, maybe for just reputation and never having put their spikes on and stepped onto the field, when they start getting accosted, it really catches them off guard. You can tell this. I didn't actually download any of the clips from Bongino, although a lot of you tagged me on it. I actually didn't download stuff from Lindsey Graham or anything else gross. In fact, from this particular program right now, because I came in last night and had to wake up at 4 a.m. local time to get this thing done, we're gonna forgo the clips and we're just going to cover stories. And I think the story of what Donald Trump did in all caps, maybe the most boomer social media post you can do. And I say that in a loving way, but come on, we're doing all caps. Donald Trump posted the following. I'll read it to you guys. This is the announcement of a sort of a pseudo ceasefire. You'll be shocked to learn that people in Iran didn't take it as though they had lost. This is being reported as kind of a victory. Donald Trump says, quote, "I'm pleased to report that the United States of America and the country of Iran have had, over the last 2 days, very good and productive conversations regarding the complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East." That sentence itself is just full of commas and seems really unnecessarily phrased. It's so rambling. Based on the tenor and the tone of these in-depth, detailed, and constructive conversations, which will continue throughout the week, I have instructed the Department of War to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period, subject to the success of the ongoing meetings and discussions. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. So there you have it. We are going to take a break. We are doing a cessation of hostilities, and we have a ceasefire in the war that people didn't even want. The problem is that the Iranians didn't get told that this is them losing. And then I went to grab all the news stories that I wanted to talk about today. And they're not exactly encouraging, because the agenda that we thought we were getting, the sort of ass-kicking American hero that was going to come in, he wasn't interested in Iran when the campaign season was going. We were interested in kicking ass in the United States. The problem that most Americans were dealing with wasn't whether or not Iran had a nuclear weapon, whether or not we were going to bomb them, which I think everybody, whether you were on the left or the right of it, you were just like, fine. We launched this kick-ass strike. We did the American thing, which is that we showed that we can project force anywhere in the world at any time. We can drop precision-guided munition right down the ass of a camel from Kansas and never touch the ground before we land them back in America. We launched from America and we came back to America. So Midnight Hammer, whether that was an aggressive act of war, which I think you'd have to argue it was, it didn't seem to have the same sort of problem of sending a bunch of carrier groups in, putting them in the range of a foreign, maybe wannabe nuclear power, and then seeing whether or not we were going to see some American flags draped on caskets, which is where we're at right now. If you remember the thing that got Donald Trump into office, it's that the previous administration opened up with the borders. I think, broadly speaking, people on left, people on right looked out and said, we cannot have a country if we don't actually have a defined country. And so that domestic agenda continues to be important. And the first story that I saw today over at ABC News, which I had to dig deeper to find out the real story, but I already knew it. Because if any of us were to take a deep breath and go backwards, I'm sitting in a room where 3 years ago, I started talking in the same way. I read this story and I had that flashback to 2023, 2024, Biden era. We find out that someone has been killed in the United States, and you read the name and it's 3 Latino names strung together with a hyphen. And you already know, even though that doesn't say it in the story, because ABC and CBS and NBC and CNN won't cover it, the minute that you dig just a little bit further, you're going to find out that that person was an illegal alien and they shouldn't have been here in the first place. We're going to go there in just 1 second too. What you're seeing on the screen, NBC News, Trump says he's postponing the nuclear strikes in Iran, cites productive talks to end the war, threatened to obliterate the power plants unless they end a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which is causing energy prices to go up. So all those things affect that domestic agenda. Fine. There's a story that this is not actually being received the way that you might hope, which is that the Iranian regime is actually claiming this as a victory. And this is where you end up in that silly space where you're saying something because it sounds right to you, and the other team might actually take it as a victory as well, because they're also doing a sales job. They're also trying to say that they have to save face. The Iranian war, rising gas prices, fuel economic concerns. Most say the conflict is not going well and don't want the regime left in power. So you have this conflicted American problem where folks are like, yeah, if we're going to be there, they shouldn't be in charge. But at the same time, like, what the hell are we doing? Why are we there? Why are we not focusing in on this thing, that domestic agenda? Those 20 core promises to the American people, of which, if you see the ones that are highlighted in green that I have circled here on the screen, they got kind of ignored. Kind of a big problem. Americans are actually not all that complicated. It's actually not that complicated, I don't think, to be successful. If you want to go out and say one thing and then do that thing, if you represent yourself in an honest manner and then you go and you live those things, for better or for worse, people will look at you and say, well, you said this and you tried to do this. That's an honest effort. The thing that I see that's kind of strange about folks that back Donald Trump, and I don't want them to be this way, they find themselves making excuses for someone because they think they're invested. I'll take my friend Alex Jones, and I'll call Alex a friend. Alex Jones has got himself backed into a corner where he thinks that he kind of has to support Donald Trump. I don't know what the personal relationship is between those two, but I've got no personal relationship there. You watch guys like Dan Bongino, who got this crash out moment where you had a professional troll and a former police officer calling him out, and he doesn't know how to deal with it because he knows deep down in his heart that he said one thing and he did another. And you'd think that Donald Trump would know that too. One of the biggest problems that I see with this administration is surrounding yourself with yes men. I tweeted it out, I think, on Friday. Strong men surround themselves with people who disagree with them. They'll be like, listen, for whatever it's worth, what you're doing is not winning. And more importantly, it's not what you said you were going to do. Can we get back on those things? When gauging a war, Americans consider at least two important things. What are the goals that are overseas and what are they going to be the impacts at home? Isn't that it? Isn't that what it was all about? Isn't that the whole thing that you did for a lot of things? It's like, what is it you want to accomplish and how will it affect me? I think people are actually relatively simple when it comes to judging success. If you're making things better for me, even if I didn't know it was going to make it better, great. If you're not, I start looking otherwise. There are people, I don't know who they are, but they must have voted for Joe Biden and then thought like, hey, I thought this guy was the right guy. But now jobs are disappearing and housing prices are going up and fuel prices are going up. And there's people that are sitting next to me and my family when we go out for pizza, and I don't understand the languages that are being spoken around me. We had that experience going out for pizza on, I don't know what it was, maybe Saturday. Took my kids out. A shop, like the most American type of pizza shop you could find. Sports up on the wall, right? They have like a nautical theme. And I'm listening, and it's like there's people speaking in Indian around me or Hindu or whatever the hell language that was. But like, I know it wasn't bacon cheeseburger nationalist language. There are people that are speaking in Spanish on all sides loudly, and they're living by different cultural norms. And you're thinking like, whatever it was, whatever this is, that's not good for me. It's not good for my family. I only know that because that's not the way that I grew up, and I kind of want my kids to have something similar. Here's going back to the CBS story. Right now, Americans want a lot of things to happen in Iran. Most feel that it's important to stop the nuclear program. I thought we did that. I thought that they actually messaged that. They want to ensure the freedom of the Iranian people, or the Iranian people are free. I don't know that that's actually a strong thing. How many of you are waking up in the morning and you're like, oh God, I hope the people of Iran are free? It's like, I don't know who that occurs to, other than Glenn Beck, who apparently has changed his profile picture over on X back to being Glenn Beck. For a little while, it was just an Iranian flag representing a monarchy that doesn't exist. And now that the conflict's underway, it would be unacceptable to leave the Iranian regime in power. I'm not 100% sure that's true either. I do know that Donald Trump now has a body count that's similar to what happened at Abbey Gate, and I'm not confident that that was something that Americans signed up for and bargained for. And the reason I'm not confident is because I can go back and read these 20 core promises, and nowhere in there was, we may have to sacrifice American blood and treasure. We may have to go and lose material and personnel. We may have to put our military in harm's way because of the people of Iran. It's not one of those core promises that I see on the screen right there. It just isn't. It's non-negotiable. I do see a lot of domestic agenda, and I do know that when I grabbed my family, the best the gas price that I could find to fill up our little minivan and take that trip was $3.50 a gallon on Friday night. It was $3.50 to fill it up, And just before this all kicked off, we were paying $2.20. And by the time I made it into Arizona, all the gas prices here are all over $4 a gallon. They're in the $4.10 to $4.25 range. So I know that's not in my interest. And I'm guessing that being bombed in Israel, being bombed in Lebanon, being bombed in Qatar, being bombed in Iran is probably not in the interest of anybody who lives in any of those countries either. And that's something. I think Americans are frustrated with it. And the problem is now that we have this potential ceasefire, if you're a regime that doesn't have any interest in being honest, what are you going to say? You're going to say, yeah, the American dogs caved to us because of our relentless resistance, and we're the good guys. And what does Donald Trump say? He says the exact opposite. I'm pleased to say that we've had such a successful bombing campaign that they're here at the table. Pretty amazing. Let's go back to where we actually started here. Let's talk about the thing that this whole election, this last couple of years, really kicked off on and probably hit home for most people. You're seeing it on the screen. This is the first story from ABC News. This is the thing that I remember thinking about when I was voting. Transactionally, there was a couple of pieces. I wanted to see my friend Steve Baker not go to prison. I wanted to see my friend Owen Schroyer get pardoned. I'd like to have seen the Proud Boys be pardoned. I think that still should happen. I think guys like Joe Biggs should. But we got a big chunk of the right off the bat, first thing, day one, the right thing was done for a number of people. And we wanted to see the border shut because we were sick of reading these stories and knowing that they could have been prevented. ABC News reporting Loyola University Chicago student shot and killed while walking with friends. So say the police. A 25-year-old man was arrested and charged in connection with the shooting. I'm going to read some of the story here because immediately when I read it, I went, oh, I know there's more to it. I know that ABC is not sharing the entirety of it. And unfortunately, they did it by the transparent mechanism of, we're going to give you just a little bit of information and you're going to have to go find the rest. The family of 18-year-old student at Loyola University Chicago was shot and killed while walking with her friends near campus. She was 18 years old. They've called for the case to be prosecuted to the full extent of both state and federal law. The slain student was identified by her family as Sheridan Gorman. Here's where I knew there was a problem with the story. A 25-year-old man, Jose Medina. If you're listening and you can't see me cocking my head like a German shepherd and giving you the eyebrow, a 25-year-old man, Jose Medina, was arrested and charged in connection with the shooting, including first-degree murder. The Gorman family says it's not justice, it's just the first step. They talk about her being 18 and her life being ahead of her. We can all know that. Education, future, family, countless lives she would have touched, all taken. No way to repair that loss, 100% true. Gorman and her friends were walking by Toby Prince Beach Park, less than a mile from the university's Lakeshore campus, when a male suspect walked up to them at 1:30 a.m. Thursday. Chicago police said he showed a gun and he opened fire towards the friends. There's no listed motive. There's no listed connection between the victims. This seems like a completely horrific, senseless thing. The victim was shot in the head and died at the scene. No one else was injured. She was the light of our lives, says the family. She made people feel seen, safe, and simply loved by who she was. She looks like a sweet girl. You can see her on the screen there. We trusted she'd be safe, and that trust is broken. Yep. The president of Loyola University, Mark Reed, said, "This is a tragic loss. Our hearts go out to the Sheridan family, loved ones, and all who knew her." And that's the end of the story. That's all. Now, we have some other questions, don't we? Aren't those of us who are paying attention where we're like, well, who's this guy? And why was he here? And what was he doing? And what made this happen? So you got to go to a local ABC affiliate. And here it is, Eyewitness 7 News. Man charged with murder of Loyola student is expected in court. And then the sub-headline comes in that all of us remember. The reason why this election in 24 had the turnout that it did and the people turned out in the way they did. Why independents, why people who are not MAGA, TM, people who are not GOP affiliated, they all looked at the same problem and they said, we cannot have an open border. We cannot have hundreds of thousands, millions of potentially violent, random, unknown human beings cruising around in this country doing God knows what. We have to have law and order. And the previous administration seemed like they were the opposite. Now, nobody wanted new wars and nobody wanted the other stuff. But at the end of the day, the domestic agenda was important because of stories like this, which we read over and over again. And every time we did, it was a young woman who should be safe in the United States, who should be able to wake up and hang out with her friends and stay out late at night and walk on the streets the way that my wife tells me. She's like looking around and going, you know, I used to spend crazy late hours out in New York City in the 90s. In the early 2000s. And there's no way I would do that today because it's terrifying to think like what could have happened. And yet it didn't because we had this sense of what was right and wrong. There was at least a semblance of a criminal justice system that deterred people from doing a lot of this stuff. And we had people that knew what the rules were. At least they knew what the consequences looked like. So an 18-year-old girl was off limits most of the time. It doesn't say that this man robbed this woman or wanted something from her or knew her or anything else. Here's the story. The victim's family releases a statement. DHS says ICE has issued an arrest detainer, alleges that the suspect is undocumented and from Venezuela. So what's he doing in our country? And another thing is, when we look at that Agenda 47, and the things that Donald Trump said, what were they going to do? They were going to close the border, they were going to stop the bleed, and they were going to enact the largest deportation campaign that could ever happen. That's where we should be mobilizing, in my opinion. Watching this death here, this is the reason why people turned out. They didn't turn out because they were worried about a nuclear Iran. A man accused of killing Loyola University freshman is expected in court. The Department of Homeland Security said the suspect, Jose Medina, is an undocumented immigrant from Venezuela. They even say it that way, in the nice way. The Chicago police arrested him. This was not a federal arrest. Investigators accused the 25-year-old of murdering Sheridan Gorman, who was a university student. He approached them. Again, the same story. Took out a gun and fired on them. The crazy thing is that he had also touched our criminal justice system previously. He entered the country illegally in 2023. Who was in charge in 2023? That was Joe Biden. That was the thing that we saw the arrest on. I mean, the election. That's why people showed up. He was arrested for shoplifting the same year that he got here. So he didn't come here to add value. He didn't come here with money and opportunities, and he was just going to work hard. He was arrested for shoplifting in Chicago that same year, 2023. And then court record shows that he never showed up for a retail theft charge, so an arrest warrant was issued. He was given a citation for the shoplifting, it sounds like. And now he's waiting around, booked on first-degree murder and weapon charges. How did he end up with a weapon? I thought Chicago was one of those places where you can't get a weapon. They've got really strict gun laws. This shows you the failure of all of the policies that people were actually voting against. It's really troubling because some poor woman is not going to be able to grow up, not going to be able to have a family, not going to be able to touch any other lives. And she's not going to be able to do so simply because we had a previous administration that allowed all of that to come in unfettered, unchecked. There's more stories of it as well. And when I see the mainstream media news, I saw the first thing when I connected this, I went, okay, well, we had unvetted Afghans. We had people coming in under temporary protected status. We had all this insanity mobbed into our country. And so, of course, there's going to be a story in the mainstream outlets this morning in light of this being one of the front page stories, and they're crying about deaths in ICE detention facilities, which are actually all not that common. And some of them are suicides, just people who took their own life. Some of them were people who came here sick. As someone who has actually investigated deaths in federal custody, which I did, in fact, it was one of the last things that I did, and I had to go through that little memory experience the other day. I rolled down the memory lane of being an FBI agent in November of 2021, when I took off my badge for the last time. And my last official act that I did was that I got called in by my boss to go investigate a death in federal custody in Otero County, New Mexico. And the guy died of unknown in the COVID isolation ward, but not of COVID. He had a bullet in the back of his head that was old and healed. People came into this country with all kinds of weird baggage. They were sick. They were previously mortally wounded, potentially. Maybe they had some sort of medical condition that was a ticking time bomb, aneurysm, heart disease, you name it. And then what I didn't hear was crying about deaths in federal custody. And that's one of the first page stories that you find today. I'm going to pull it up real quick for us. It's right here. ICE custody deaths are at a 2-decade high. Maybe because for the first time, ICE is actually doing their job, but I thought they were going to be doing it to the point where we were going to see this monstrous, massive deportation operation, and we're just not seeing it. And instead, what you're seeing is wall-to-wall coverage of dropping bombs on a country that's not actually a threat to me every day. It actually has nothing to do with me. And I was told, and there's plenty of testimony going out there now. Tulsi Gabbard at ODNI, Joe Kent said it as well. Others have made the same claim. The claim is we obliterated the nuclear program. All I see is a propaganda campaign trying to tell me that, well, they actually really were a threat because they can reach out and hit a base in Diego Garcia, which didn't also happen. We should sit here at this moment and say, you can verify that some young girl was shot in Chicago. That turns out pretty easy to do. There's Americans who will come out and speak about it. The families will come out and say it. You can verify things that exist in this country, especially tragic loss, when it can be independently third-party verified. What you can't verify is what sort of capabilities Iran has that's classified, and whether or not it actually fired missiles that didn't land on anything, and whether or not they had the ability to reach an American military base. You can't actually verify that. None of us do. Have any of you seen videos? Apparently one was intercepted and one failed in flight. And that's now the new argument that, yeah, obviously, Iran was a threat to everybody in the West. Look what they had. They had a missile that could hit London. It's like, maybe it could. That sounds really curated. I'm kind of a skeptic on these things. I'm not a skeptic finding out that an 18-year-old girl was killed by some guy named Jose Medina. That sounds 100% something that I've been able to experience here. And we know people that have had that happen to them. And I have friends that are out there trying to round those guys up. Isn't that interesting? ICE custody deaths. This is from CBS News. So again, we're jumping from ABC to CBS. ICE custody deaths are at a 2-decade high. An Afghan refugee who helped U.S. forces is one of the latest to die. He's an Afghan immigrant. He's an immigrant to this country, came in as part of the 88,000 to 100,000 people that came in here. His name is Nasir Patikawal. Sounds like a bacon cheeseburger nationalist problem, right? Received a call. This is the brother. They had just arrested his brother, whose name was Mohammed Nazir Paktiawal. When I see these names, Paktiawal, I just go, what is that? Did he speak English? Why was he calling his brother? The first thing that his brother told him was that he wasn't feeling well. Quote, I told the agent that my brother needs help. He's not feeling good. He's feeling pain in his body. He told me, don't worry about it. We have a nurse. We'll take care of him. He hung up the phone on me. One of these guys, and this is the fun thing about this story, one of these guys was evacuated from Afghanistan. I don't know which Paktiawal was helping U.S. military forces. And I'm not sure why the other one was in custody. Imagine reading a story where the first 4 paragraphs tell you information. Somebody died, somebody with the same name received a phone call, somebody died with that name, unclear who, somebody worked with the American military. And the conflation is also 2 days later, a 19-year-old Mexican man was presumed dead by suicide. They're just throwing slop at you with no clarity whatsoever. And this is from CBS News, where they actually have decent editors. They have people that do this for a living, have done it for decades, who are theoretically trained at journalism school to be able to convey information. All I walked away with knowing is some guy was sick and died in custody, and they don't have an assigned blame yet. These things happen, by the way. Again, I investigated a death of a guy who had a freaking bullet wound in the back of his head. And then he died, and we had to send him off to the coroner because they thought that his fellow inmate had killed him. The guy had gone nuts inside the cell, attacked a much smaller man, and then fell over dead, and nobody knows what it is. And when we were done with it, we were like, nobody saw it. The guy in the room was terrified. There's a healing bullet wound. Again, when you deal with somebody who's dead and they have a bullet wound and it's healed up in the back of their skull, and then you go and they get the autopsy and they're like, yeah, we don't know what the bullet, if it killed him or not killed him, but he got shot sometime several months ago. And now he's dead. He's a big fat guy. Huge head, just enormous, shaved, looked like a cartel type guy. I don't know what his story was. He came into the border illegally. He was in custody and then he died. At least on that clarity, I could go, okay, well, it doesn't sound like this is a problem for the FBI to deal with. In this case, I don't even know what they think we're supposed to do, CBS, because they're obviously telling you something that's emotional. There's a guy who worked for American forces. He left the country during the disastrous withdrawal in 2021. And then you've got another guy who died this year in ICE custody. Why, if you came here during the military withdrawal, did you get arrested by ICE? Was it because we did a really terrible job in this country for 4 straight years? And the thing that Donald Trump promised is that we were going to get rid of the people that didn't belong here, whether they were on the terrorist watch list, with Joe Kent testified, 18,000 plus people associated with known or affiliated terrorist groups. Wasn't that the big deal? Like, we had this internal threat to America. Isn't that what the America First thing would be? Instead of going over and picking a fight with a country that's not sending a bunch of people in, we already had people come in under the previous administration. And then a 19-year-old Mexican man died by presumed suicide. Those are 13 deaths, triple the number that died at this point last year. Last year in 2025, 31 ICE detainees died, which was a 2-decade high. That's what CBS says. And that's their analysis, by the way. That's not published by the federal government, so maybe that's true. The rising death toll comes as the population hits highs. They're holding more than 68,000 people in detention right now across all the facilities for ICE. 68,000 people. Were we not told that 20 million people came into this country? I mean, I think that's what I heard. 20 million. So how are we going to make a dent in 20 million with 68,000? I don't get it. And it doesn't seem like we're focused in on this piece here. The top couple things. Part of making America affordable again would be reducing the amount of strain that you'd have on the rental systems, on the food market, on the fuel market, et cetera, et cetera. If you've got 20 million people that have no business being here. We got 68,000 in custody, and a bunch of them left, apparently. Self-deported, which will be a decreasing number. It's hard to see it. Here's your deaths in custody, which, by the way, CBS shares with us. It's on the screen right now. Turns out there were low deaths in custody under Obama. They were relatively low under Biden. They were fairly high in 2004. And fairly high is like 30 of the 68,000. When you've dealt with these populations and you see them come in and you're like, we have no idea how sick they were, what sort of underlying medical conditions. We have no idea what sort of problems they have with other people that are in custody because they've got some sort of beef with other people that are in these populations. And then we're going to blame it on the president for some reason. All I know is that during the Obama and the Biden years, it looks like they probably just didn't have that many people in custody because there's a certain percentage of people. This guy who came in from Afghanistan, by the way, CBS News lets you know right here, and I'll show you on the screen. He had no pre-existing medical conditions, according to his family. I dealt with people that came in from Afghanistan that had no pre-existing birthday on file and nobody knew how old they were, and they decided how old they were based on how tall they were. That's how good the records are. Again, this was the big issue. We brought people into this country that no one knew who they were. And could we not spend some time on that domestic agenda instead of like screwing around, starting a war and then now a ceasefire that is going to be claimed as victory for the triumphant capabilities of the Iranian? They fought off the imperial dogs of the U.S. or whatever sort of nonsense they're spinning on their end. We're getting the same garbage. It's really hard to watch it for me. And I've got this sitting on the screen too, because I know that we are constantly dealing with nonstop propaganda from our administration because of this. As I drove into Arizona, my wife and I had this conversation. We literally had to bring this up. Where is Nancy Guthrie? You guys remember, if you watch this program, I was pretty late to the game talking about her because I was like, this is a silver alert. There was a silver alert for an F-250 as we drove into Arizona. All the road signs said it. There's a missing man. I might have been in New Mexico now that I think about it. There's a missing man, elderly man, who got in an F-250 and left. You know what? Maybe good for him. I have no idea what his situation is. I think you should be able to get in your F-250 and just drive off if you want. But there's a missing person who's elderly driving a Ford truck. It's the same story as the missing Nancy Guthrie. It was wall-to-wall coverage. Do you remember that? Before they were trying to sell you a war in Iran and telling you how America always was at war with Iran and trying to tell you that it's in America's best interest to send every munition we have and every interceptor we have and bring home 13, 14, 15 flag-draped coffins. Before they were telling you that, they had Lindsey Graham out there with a throbbing war boner giving you the propaganda idea that that we should do the same thing as we did at Iwo Jima. Apparently, the biggest story in America for several weeks was that an old lady disappeared in Arizona, which is a state that is full of older ladies. And the FBI was going to solve the case. We put the full might and capabilities of our $11 billion a year federal law enforcement agency. And what do we have? Unknown. And the odds are the story of Nancy Guthrie is probably really similar to the story of Sheridan Gorman, who I just read you had a bad experience in Chicago. It turns out that's a pretty high probability based on where she lived and what goes down. Nobody knows what happened. Just takes a robbery gone wrong. There's a lot of desert. I just drove through hours and hours and hours of wasteland. We had a walking joke, my wife and I. We'd look over and we'd see some of these facilities, and they're like ramshackle huts, and they're destroyed trailers, and some shed and shack and all this other garbage in the middle of freaking nowhere. You're driving on a highway. You look out there and you just see like this little like enclave of nonsense. And she'd go, "What is that?" And we started deciding that that's where the underground bunkers are. That's what the entrance to the underground bunker system. If you're going to have a fun little imagination about what America can and can't do, the continuity of government, the underground tunnels, and all the things that people like to imagine. If you guys have seen the shows that are out there now, because we have such a fascination in pop culture, the idea of Fallout, which is a video game, the Vault Tech Company, which built these like survival bunkers. Like when you put them underneath like some like destroyed shed, just like Raccoon City and video game nonsense. That's what we saw. There's a ton of desert. There's unlimited amounts of open space in this country, it turns out. Most of it is uninhabited. I had the same conversation with George Hill at about 8 a.m. while it was still coming up, the sun's still coming up in Texas. And I've been driving through basically nothingness for hours on end because we got up real early. And he goes, the East Coast mind can't even conceive of how vast and large the United States is. And all that is to say, this country is huge. The things that are going on in this country, the number of things that we could focus on are unlimited. And to watch that our focus is overseas, when we apparently had a hugely important story of a missing old lady, I'm sure it was really important to her family. It still is really important. They'd like to gather some of that press back. We had an 18-year-old that was killed because we had an illegal immigration problem that basically decided an election. The number of these families, they call them angel families now, who experience violence from people that should have never been in the country in the first place to commit that violence. The fact that we brought in 100,000 unknowns and we have something like 18,000 unknown terrorist possibilities just chilling out here in our country. And apparently we have time to go after some of the other stuff that's going on because, you know, anything to distract you. Anything to take you away from Agenda 47. You win elections because you make a claim, then you make a promise on what you're going to do about the claim, and then you back it up with some words and some actions, and then people can see it. And what I see right now is this like 2003 Iraq war sort of propaganda level with all the holes in it. And suddenly the people that used to be experiencing nothing but flattery and love, they're actually experiencing that folks can do a little bit of their own research, which we weren't supposed to do during COVID. That's another thing I had to live through on Friday. The betrayal of our federal government to federal employees, to the DOD employees who are still not brought back on board. And we never actually fixed those problems in this country. The problems where the federal government made certain statements like, here's your employment, and this is what it's going to look like, and there's due process if we want to get rid of you. They waived all the rules under the previous admin. And it has been corrected. A lot of you thought that by electing Donald Trump in 2024, all the evil things that were done under the previous 4 years were going to get straightened out right away. And it turns out you can't do reform with the same people, which is why I know that the CIA that's giving you information now, that the John Ratcliffe going out there and telling you what it looks like, you can't do reform with 99% of the same people there. You can't do reform at the FBI with 99, 95% of the same people there. They haven't dramatically changed it. They didn't fix it by putting Dan Bongino in the chair or putting Kash Patel there. He didn't fix it by putting Tulsi Gabbard in charge of our domestic intelligence because she's fighting against it. And we've got that huge domestic battle. And instead, they want you to focus on tiny little blips or something overseas. And you're not supposed to recognize that the same things that would have had the MAGA crowd in absolute like panic mode, the cost of fuel, when you want to take a regular American vacation and take your little kids across the country to go see their grandparents. Like, that's what I thought we were voting against. Because we experienced it. We saw what it looked like. It was, it's $5 a gallon gas. And then today we have people making excuses. You need to have that. That's temporary pain. There's an entire propaganda campaign pushing out there that's actually what you voted for. What you actually voted for was the same things that were happening under Biden, but they meant better. And it's been reframed better today because our people are in charge. You can't do reform with the same people. You can't claim that the same results that pop up for different reasons are suddenly okay and good if you're a principled person. And whether you like it or not, more people since 2020, since 2021, where they got to see what the damage looked like when government got too big, they all went like, yeah, we'd like less of that. And instead, we got a guy in office who was claiming that was going to be a little bit less of that. In fact, one of the first things he was going to do was go and be able to eliminate federal bureaucrats. And most of them are still there. And they're not in any danger of leaving. And people will never know their names for the things that they've done and the families they've destroyed. And I'm sitting here right next to the spot where I realized what that looked like and why I started talking out in the first place. It's a strange moment to kind of walk back in and see things years later and notice that the same problems that I saw under the previous administration, they still exist under this administration. We're just calling them different things and we're trying to make different excuses for them. I think we could do better. I think a lot of people are frustrated with that because they expected from major voices who have now fallen from grace in a lot of ways that the do would matter, that we would expect outcomes and principles, not just politicians and falling in love with the person and the personality. So less of that is going to be interesting. It's tough. It's a tough pill to swallow. We'd like to just be able to put in one ass kicker, send them down range, and then that person solves all the problems. That's the hope. That's the American sort of the myth, the great American hero that comes in and one man turns the tide of the battle. That's what Chuck Norris was in all the movies, right? He's the one guy. He stood for truth and he stood for justice. It doesn't matter if it's Superman or Chuck Norris playing Chuck Norris because he was Chuck Norris. You send one guy in there and you're like, yeah, we don't need to send in the entirety of whatever that thing is. We want to send one dude who's going to stage a personal landing on the ass of evil. And he's going to go out there. He's going to kick it. He's going to kick it hard. He's going to kick it righteously. And he's also going to have the fist right above the face of the bad guy that could end their life. And then he's going to show appropriate justice and mercy. And we're going to let him face like whatever needs to be done. We're going to let God sort him out after he sends a long prison sentence instead of just blowing up everything and destroying everything. Yeah, there's some movies that did both of those things, obviously. It's sad. It's a sad thing to think. It's like, how many people grew up with that poster that you see on the screen right now? Or had that mentality, like denim, shoulder strap freaking Uzis, and the American flag, like that's what it's about. You can hear the freaking eagles, shriek in the background for the freedom of that picture. And the other thing that I recognize too from this picture, which is an 80s, it's just an 80s icon. It's that Americans thought America was the good guy no matter what, because there was a bad guy, because we had a duality for all of us that grew up with any recollection or understanding of the Cold War. It was like there's evil and then there's us. And we stand between the evil and we're bringing peace and prosperity and democracy and capitalism and the American way and blue jeans and T-shirts and baseball caps. We're bringing freedom, whether you like it or not, and you're going to actually like it. You're going to love all that, right? That's what we used to sell. And now we're like, well, you've got more tyranny and you've got more injustice and things are pretty expensive. And you got a car that's going to think for you. And it's going to tell you when you can or cannot speed. And we're going to give you speed trap tickets that are going to just be a camera hanging out there. We're going to have some dude trying to enforce something, even though he's not from here. We're going to hear the mainstream media cry more for a guy who died in ICE custody than for an 18-year-old woman tell the true story that she was killed by some illegal alien. Because America's not the good guy in their mind anymore. And that's something. We'll hit a couple more stories here. And then we're going to jump off. By the way, ABC brought up the story of Nancy Guthrie. They have a full timeline here. Let me pull it up. There it is. Full timeline. Where is it? There it is. ABC, Nancy Guthrie abduction. It's interesting that I thought about it the same time that these people apparently thought about it. This was pushed out yesterday. Literally as we were driving into this state of Arizona, we got the timeline of the mysterious case of the disappearance of a lady. I would say that the most interesting timeline is how it appeared as a mainstream media story and how it inconveniently, when it was no longer convenient to cover it, they went after everything else. With the left saying that Donald Trump's a bad guy, with the right trying to act like he's the greatest guy, and everybody forgetting that how about what happens just in America is American news. Anyhow, I'll put this over in the comments over on our Rumble and our YouTube channel, so you guys will be able to read this if you guys want to see the full time. If you've forgotten, if it's relevant to you, now that I'm in the state that is full of these saguaro cacti and the same sort of buildings that are all built the same way, it was just, I couldn't help but think about how interesting. It just went away. It was never that big of a national story, apparently. And CBS covered it too, by the way. So here's another story. We'll put a couple of these in here. Just the interest that it has disappeared. Let me talk about the other thing that I think was really important, because I think Donald Trump covered this in his Agenda 47. And I know that he did, because I've read it to you, even if they pulled it off the web. This story is also relevant today. NBC News covering it. Supreme Court tackling a dispute over mail-in ballots ahead of the November elections. What does that tell us? It's the reason why it's on my thumbnail this morning too. Did we not recognize that we had some real serious issues with the mechanics of the way the country was moving? There were people here that didn't belong here. The government wasn't serving its function, and one of its core functions was to defend the national border. So we wanted that. We wanted the people that came in while the border was broken to be gone. We wanted the affordability fixed, and the affordability just meant reducing the burden on the system. And then the real question was, will there be real elections? I have this sneaking suspicion, and maybe you guys do as well, for those of you that are that have been kind of keeping track of this. My sneaking suspicion is that Donald Trump wasn't actually even elected the way that we'd like to believe. That whatever the numbers they touted under Biden and the numbers they touted under Trump, because I'm seeing the same thing. You're disagreeing with 77, 80 million. You're disagreeing with some ungodly number of millions of people that I can't keep track of, and neither can you. And none of us can independently verify it. And if you didn't believe that the election in 2020 was legit, why did you suddenly think that it was legit in 2024? And what makes you think it would be legit in 26 for the midterms or legit in 2028? I see both parties willing to cry about this stuff. What I don't see is the people that said they were going to come in and fix our election system, which, by the way, was part of Agenda 47. Single person, single ballot, paper, no mail-in ballots, none of this scam stuff. And it's being adjudicated right now in the courts instead of being fixed by the legislature. And my instinct is as follows. Having talked to people that have been around what guys like Joe Kent were involved in, what people like Tulsi Gabbard have looked at, being around the fact that our federal government, my former agency, didn't investigate fraud in 2020 for the election. They just didn't. They were worried about voter suppression. Why is it that when the quote unquote our team gets into power, they immediately forget the stuff is hey, we got to go fix the mechanics to make sure that this will continue to be fair. And it makes me think that they didn't win in the first place. I think that we just have selections. I don't have all the evidence for it, but there's plenty of people that have spent time doing it. And I listen to them and I go, okay, your voice sounds pretty credible to me. Here's what I can assess. I can assess that if you didn't believe that 2020 was legit and the numbers on it looked ridiculous to people who don't even have a background analyzing numbers, well, then you can quite easily say that 2024 was simply a political bleed-off valve, because if you didn't put Donald Trump into office, I think there would have been violence. And I've been speaking to members, military and in federal law enforcement over the last couple of weeks, and nobody thinks that this solution was voted out of. And unfortunately, even though you may have seen an opportunity and it appeared to the average person yeah, we really got what we wanted, and this person's going to be able to go out and solve the problems, as they said. Again, Agenda 47 was 20 promises. If you went after those 20 promises and you achieved 10 of them, the first 10, this country would be infinitely better. But I can tell you that we haven't fixed weaponized government right now, because it was only a few days ago that my friends, and only a few of them, who were working for the FBI, who got removed in weaponized fashion, were able to go back to it. And by the way, I'm not one of those people. There was no settlement with me, with our DOJ as it stands. There was no settlement with me. I got no money out of it. We're still actively suing them for the thing that they fired people for doing. Just take this for a moment and put this in your head. I have an active lawsuit against the current DOJ and FBI, and they are defending the position that I'm wrong, and the allegations that I have sued them over. They also use those exact same allegations to terminate the person who I allege did what I said he did. They fired him for the reason that I'm suing them. It just feels like window dressings. It feels like we're putting up really nice curtains over something to just act like there's not a gaping hole in the wall. And if you think that Donald Trump was elected and not selected to just keep you guys at bay, then you got to tell me the mechanism. You got to tell me how. The Supreme Court is tackling a dispute over mail-in ballots ahead of the November election, spurred on by Donald Trump's hostility to mail-in ballots and mail-in voting. The Republican National Committee says the states cannot count ballots that are sent by election day but arrive later. The entirety of this stems around a Mississippi court case, a Mississippi law, similar to measures in 13 other states that allow mail-in ballots to be counted as long as they're postmarked properly, which means you put it in the mail, you put it in on time, they're postmarked by election day, but they're received whenever. Is there any other time when you get credit for trying? For those of you that pay rent, how about those of you that pay a mortgage? Everybody pays some form of housing, at least probably everybody who listens to this program. Do you get credit for having it postmarked properly if it's received late? It's like, look, I wrote you a check. I put it in the mail the day that it was due. I don't know when it's going to get there. No, you're held accountable for the action. There is a debt. There is a requirement. If you want to be able to be considered non-delinquent, I pay my rent 4 days early because I know it has to clear. Many of you do the same sort of thing. You send off your mortgage check before the end of the month so that by the first of the month, it's recognized. That seems straightforward, but there's state laws that say that they have to recognize it. And so this is the question that the Supreme Court is now going to decide. They will hear arguments because Donald Trump has been ramping up his opposition to mail-in voting. The reason that we have an opposition to mail-in voting is because it's not transparent, because we can't see on black and white paper. This is the fun of sending one man in to fix the problem. This is the lure of the Chuck Norris movie, right? It's like, is it a complicated military action with a bunch of diplomacy and a bunch of secret things? No, it's one guy kicking ass, and you can see that he kicks the asses of all the people whose asses he kicked because you can follow the story of one individual person. The further you get away from the individual, the more likely it is you can hide something. And the story of mail-in ballots and machines and all this stuff, it looks like this. You go in, you did what you thought you were supposed to do, you filled out a ballot, you dropped it into some freaking machine, and then it goes into a black box, and then it spits out an answer and tells you yes or no. And the answer is maybe the person won, or maybe they didn't. The polling said this, but this happened. How does anybody know that any of that is legit? A regular person, like up until I guess my first election. After that, they decided that they were no longer going to do things that made sense. Like somehow we managed to, in a country of 250 million people, as I was growing up, they were always able to count ballots and figure it out. And then suddenly they couldn't. And suddenly it had to go through machines and all the chaotic insanity that people have looked at. It's like, when did you lose access? It's when you stopped having fly-by-wire. It's when you stopped pulling the lever and then the lever physically moved whatever it was, the flaps, the actuators, the control surfaces. Most people don't even know what their cars are doing right now. They're giving input to some sort of like screen. They're pushing buttons and things are happening. Like the further away you get from the thing that you do to the thing that happens, the less you know about what's going on. The magical gremlins that make things work inside your refrigerator or make it work inside your toaster oven, or you're pushing buttons, but it's being transmitted all over the place. You're sitting here in a car and you're driving with push buttons or self-driving, God forbid. I say God forbid because who the hell knows what's going on in there? You ever had your car take over something? I had that happen yesterday too. We're driving and we've got some like safety feature where my car started braking automatically without me trying to do it because it saw the shadow of a semi on the freaking highway at 80 miles an hour. Just decelerated aggressively. For me, watching that happen is the same thing as watching an election where I don't know what's going on behind the vote. I pushed the button, I pushed in I dropped the ballot in, and then some other outcome came out that I couldn't expect. And neither can you. And I can't tell you why it did it. I don't know what the censors saw on the road. I don't know that these numbers were right. And Donald Trump was correct to say it. But the funny thing is that we are now, 2 years away from that election, and it's not solved. And I don't expect that it will be solved. And the Senate is over there belaboring whether or not they think that you should be able to have to show an ID to be able to freaking make one of the most important decisions you can do every year, voting for anything from the local level to the federal level. Did Jose Medina have access to voting? Probably can. There are people, we find out every single day that the people that were supposedly never doing the thing that they were supposed to do, they were voting illegally. It happens. It's wild. Here's the best part. Mississippi's Republican Attorney General is defending its law to count ballots that arrive after Election Day, pitting the state Republicans against the Republican National Committee and against Mississippi's own Republican Party. The Libertarian Party of Mississippi is also challenging the measure. If you want to know why things don't get changed, it's because the status quo is incredibly strong. In the same way that the current federal government is defending the policies, the actions, and the positions the previous administration did under the Biden administration, they still have to manually defend against people who have brought allegations of malfeasance. You have the Attorney General from Mississippi, who's a Republican, fighting the national Republican platform of, we would like to see no mail-in ballot, let's keep this thing clean. They've pitted the people who theoretically all should agree that smaller government is the answer, because that's what the Republican Party used to stand for, that all of us want to see election security, and they're fighting against it because they're like, no. You can't change this thing that we did, because our job is to defend whatever exists currently. Whoever's in power assumes the burden and the guilt and the responsibility of the previous, and they defend it like it's their own. And that's why we end up finding out that things never get fixed. It's not like there's some sort of unified thing. Now, on the left, they don't do that stuff at all. And that's the other crazy part. On the political left, you will literally see they will come in and they will cut off their nose to spite their face to get quote unquote progress towards whatever crazy things they have. When I say that the political left is just the same as the political right now, when it comes in, those two parties are both to the left of me. One of them is speeding and they're breaking the law and they're in the passing lane doing 100. Republicans are just doing the speed limit, doing the same direction, the same way. So all that stuff is really disappointing to me. Here's the last really funny thing. Imagine thinking that a government shutdown was not an opportunity for you to be able to fix something. This is the last little thing from NBC News. Tom Homan says that ICE agents are now going to be assisted crowded airport checkpoints amid TSA staffing shortages. Can I tell you why I think this all sews it all together for you? There are a few legitimate missions of the federal government, and the most legitimate one that I can find would be making sure that people who don't belong in the United States are no longer in the United States. And instead, what we're seeing is we're going to take the people who are going after the bad guys, the Jose Medina types that are killing some young girl who's out with her friends, coming home maybe from a bar or whatever at 1:30 in the morning. She should be able to walk home safe in an American city. She's killed by some dude from Venezuela who came here, immediately started breaking the law, immediately didn't show up for our judicial system, and then just was on the lam for a couple of years before ending somebody's life. Who knows what other crimes he was involved in. Rather than have ICE agents go after that, we're going to have to staff them up at security checkpoints. Instead of Republicans being like, hey, by the way, TSA is just a big freaking money grab for Leidos. It's just a big way for us to send a bunch of money into federal security contracts that actually don't make anybody safer. We've done the analysis. We've looked at the red cells, and it just isn't any better. We've hardened the cockpit door. Americans are not going to have another box cutter takeover of an aircraft. That's not going to happen. There's enough. We could staff up federal air marshals and make sure that's not the case. Rather than do that, we're going to take ICE agents who should be hunting the Jose Medinas, and we're going to put them and have them do slappy tickle with you while you try to come through the freaking x-ray machines and the scanners. They're going to participate in security theater instead of doing the thing that was promised, which, by the way, promise number 2, the largest deportation operation in American history. That was what was supposed to happen. So watching all that go down, it shows me why there's not like a we because I'm not part of a we. And I know that the quote unquote, if there was a we, the we is not winning. Because rather than shut down big, stupid, wasteful, fraudulent government and let dudes who are actually out there hunting down predators in this country, we're going to have them go and stand at airports. They're going to take over for a company that, a group of people that are not getting the job done in the first place. And now they're not getting paid. One last little story on it. This is when things are completely amiss. This is the last story from NBC. I saw these like three in a progression. Nonprofits and unions and airport systems are rallying to feed TSA officers. Just think if the government was actually run by conservatives, like the GOP actually did conservative things, wouldn't they divest this to the states? Wouldn't they take the budget that they would otherwise have for Homeland Security, for the TSA type stuff, and just be like, look, we're sick of managing Washington, D.C. administrations to do security at your little airport in Austin, Texas, in Phoenix, Arizona, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We'd like to just not take that money from you, and you guys can do it. We have some trained people. We'd love it if you hired them. They've already been doing this for a while. You can run them on local scrutiny. You can give them, peace officer status so they actually have the ability to do certain things that a law enforcement officer might. How about we stop having big government be the answer? And instead, what you see is this story here that they are unfunded, unpaid, and now nonprofits, unions, and people at airports are being asked to give gift cards for groceries and gas, as we were supposed to solve affordability in this country. We're going to try to pay for the people who are already going to be paid by the federal government. And as someone who spent 14 months as an unpaid government employee on permanent suspension, which I got to go through that experience again, reliving like what that looked like and all the things that we lost as a family when that went on. And I'm sitting right next to the place where I started speaking. It's hard for me to have a ton of sympathy when you had a government paycheck that gets refunded every single year, and there's always the possibility that they may not fund it in the time that you need. You get paid by the federal government and you're not putting things away for a rainy day, and missing the first paycheck that you've had is enough to basically made you need to go on a charity drive. I don't know. I'm seeing this. I see this story up here. You guys, you can see the picture of it. TSA gift card drive. They're putting it up in official places, printed on paper, cellophane taped to a plexiglass thing that we paid for. They're accepting grocery, gas, King Soopers. Is that a store you guys have? Safeway, Walmart. No food or cash is accepted. Thank you for your support during this partial government shutdown. You're going to pay your taxes like you always do. You're going to pay, and we'd also like it for you to pay to take care of these workers who are not getting paid, who are going to get paid when it's all said and done. Again, guaranteed they'll all get their back pay. Freaking crazy. And that just tells me that there's not conservatives running anything at all in this government. So there you have it. I don't know what any of that means, but it's disappointing. It really is. It's a generational opportunity lost. And the experience of someone like Dan Bongino, who stepped into that space after talking such a big game about what he would do and how you would do it right. Imagine making your career all about talking about the solutions, getting an opportunity to step in, and then immediately defaulting to the status quo where you're now suing and the state is fighting back and you're both Republicans and all that kind of nonsense, right? It is why people are upset, I think. It's why you're going to get called out in public if you're part of this administration. If you made a killing, tens of millions or $100+ million talking about how you understand how it all works. And by the way, Donald Trump is in the same category. That guy has pulled billions of dollars in crypto. And Americans, if they don't see a material difference, and you had this 4-year period where you really had an opportunity where the will of the people was behind the things that you said on your own list, where you wrote it up. You're like, here's what needs to be done. I see the problem. Americans said, yes, you see the problem. And then you get there, and then the problem is not something that you're going to address. And you don't clearly say, here's why I can't do what I said. If you just claim that it's happening, everything's fine, and you try to reframe it, and you give us that 2003 propaganda, like enjoy the slop because it's so good, and you're unpatriotic and you're not American if you don't, yuck. That's why so many people I see that are in federal service, people that I see that are in law enforcement, people I see that are retired, that are serious, that look around and just go, man, what on earth? Like, I thought we outsourced the revolution. I thought we sent an American Chuck Norris type who was going to personally wrangle the issue. And instead, what we got was I don't know what a bootleg Chuck Norris is. Maybe put one in the comments for me. Who's a bootleg Chuck Norris? That would be it's like a loaded weapon version of Missing in Action. That's kind of what it feels like. It's the Charlie Sheen version that they did when he was doing, what was that movie? There was a movie. Anyway, there was a comedy where they made fun of some of the Chuck Norris movies. That's what it feels like instead. But the joke's on all of us, unfortunately. All right. That's enough for today. It is hard. I mean, I'm telling you, a lot of this comes from just sitting in the same room and seeing the exact same stuff that I saw 4 years ago, 3 years ago. It's really frustrating. Not because I wanted them. I wanted to celebrate victories. Man, it would have been really nice. And why would it be really nice? Because I got little kids. Because I got a 2-year-old that's growing up in this world. And my 8-year-old, when she left this house that I'm sitting in, when she left this room the last time, we moved to Texas, and she said, protect us from our enemies in prayer. And when I asked her what that meant, she told me the federal government was our enemy at 5 years old. How many of your young children, way too young to know things like that, are thinking the same thing? That's it. All right. So, folks, rest in peace, Chuck Norris. Thank you for the service to the country as an icon for America. I wish the people that were in power right now looked at that and took that as some impetus. And we'll get some good clips and some things together. And we're going to be doing this podcast in the morning here. It'll be god-awful early in Arizona, America. At least the part that I'm in is pretty much America. We'll do this for the rest of the day. Guys, make sure you support the sponsors. My Patriot Supply is in the link in the show description below. You'll also find our affiliate links, which are people, if you don't buy them, we don't get paid. It's not a big deal. But if there's something that you're interested in, especially if you're looking for gun safes, if you're looking for something that will be able to protect your firearms investments, I had those exact Agile boxes, which you'll find on Secure It. I had them sitting right over there and right over there. I brought them to my father's place when I had no home and I got kicked out of the bureau. I actually brought them with me. I think I've moved them 5 times. We'll do a whole discussion about it on the Tackleberry Project on why decentralized storage makes sense when it comes to having your firearms stored up. And you guys will be able to see like some of the cool stuff that they have. If you've seen the Tackleberry Project wall, which is like a display wall for firearms, it all comes from things at Secure It. I absolutely 100% unequivocally endorse their things. I bought them before I ever knew I would ever tell anyone else about them. And when people inside the FBI or former friends like from the military and so on would say, hey, what are you using for weapon storage? I 100% would send them to Secure It before they would ever have any relationship with us. I actually did an interview with their founder prior to knowing that we ever had an opportunity to work with these guys. And I just ran into them by chance while I was at SHOT Show. And they said that they would give me a link that would redirect my audience to whatever their best deals are. So check them out. Link in the show description there. As always, you can check out our friends over at Shield Arms. I brought a Shield Arms weapon with me. No big deal. But as we hit the road, we try to make sure that we're staying safe. We will do the shows this morning. So look for it at the regular time, 0930 Eastern time. That's 8:30 in Texas, America. And it's freaking 6:30. I think it's 6. Yeah, it's 6:30 here in Arizona. So it's been an early day. I look forward to being a little bit more gathered in my thoughts for the rest of it. God bless all of you guys. I hope you have a fantastic time. I will get you a palate cleanse. I will owe you one. So put it on the list and grab it. We'll get it. We'll get maybe 2 tomorrow. All right. We'll see you. Have a great start to your week on this Monday morning.
Thanks for listening to The Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram at Kyle Seraphin.